Okay, how many people your favorite song is a little bit newer? It's like, 2 years old or, around that. Okay, all right. And is it a country song? Anybody, it's a country song? Okay. A hip-hop song? A mumble rap song? Rock? We got all sorts of different variety. Classical, I love classical music. Anybody here like classical music? That's right, it's good. It's good stuff. It's good. It's good for the soul. Now, we all have a favorite song, but sometimes that song that you love, you didn't realize you loved it until you heard it again for the first time in a long time. Now, my wife and I, we love to go out to eat, and we generally have to go to places that are open real late because we just, we have busy lives. And so sometimes we don't get to eat dinner until late at night. And Smoky Bones in Menor is open until 2 a.m., okay? 2 a.m., and so sometimes we roll in there just by 1:30. The people are like, oh my God, these people again. They're gonna get that big old portion of meat. And that's why we go to Smoky Bones, because we love meat. Give it up for meat. Amen. 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 It's the only thing about the fall of humanity in Genesis is we get meat from it. And so if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, I still love you. Will you still love me? I hope so. So as we're eating at Smoky Bones, they always play the 90s playlist. Now, I just had a birthday a couple days ago. I'm 38, I believe. 37, 38, I don't know. Who's keeping track? But I think I'm 38, and so I was born in 1980. So those 90s songs, those are stories of my teenage years, right? The anthems of my youth. And so they're playing the 90s playlist. I'm like, oh, LL Cool J! Love this song! Right? Like you hear all these tunes that you like. Now, again, sometimes you don't remember that you love them until you hear them again for the first time. Now, the theme we're talking about in this series is the theme of the gospel. And the gospel says, and I'm going to keep saying this for the next 5 weeks, so hopefully you guys remember this because it's real important. Maybe you put it on Facebook or something. I don't know. We are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dare believe. Yet at the very same time, more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. Now, since this is at the center of everything we do as a church, we have to talk about it. The gospel is at the center of everything that we do as a church. We don't want to be reminded of it. We want to study it. And there's all sorts of passages in the Bible. I believe from the front page of the Bible all the way to the last, it's all about the gospel. Every sermon I preach, we can get a gospel message out of it. This message that we are more sinful and flawed and hopeless than we ever dared dream, and that at the same time we're more loved in Christ than we ever dared hope. We can preach that in every single sermon from every page of the Bible. But there's some stories that are just so good and so clear that we just have to talk about them a couple times a year. And the story I'm going to talk about today is one of those stories because it's like that favorite song from 20 years ago. Even though you've heard it before, maybe you even have it memorized, hearing it again is good for the soul. So what I want to do is jump back into Luke 15. We started talking about Luke 15 last week. Again, as I always say, if you have a phone with the Bible app, use that. If you got a Bible, use that. We have Bibles that we offer as you come in. Take one, you can keep it. We want you guys to have Bibles, have access to that, but we'll also have the words on the screen. If you haven't memorized, put your hand up. You deserve to show off. Anybody here have it memorized? Good job, young man. Very proud of you. All right, so we're going to talk about the story of the prodigal son. Who knows the story? Do you like this story? You should. You should love it. You should love it. You should love it. And maybe you've heard this song. Maybe you've got this message, this parable. Maybe you've got it memorized. But hopefully today it can take on fresh meaning because the Holy Spirit has written the scriptures. And through every word of the scripture, he communicates to our heart. So what we pray today is that he gives us fresh insight into his word. So last year I said when I preached on this passage that we're going to do it one time a year. And so here we are again. And we're going to preach on this passage probably one time a year because the concept of the gospel is taught in this passage with so much clarity and power. And it fits right into the context of what we talked about last week, which was the story of the lost sheep. Do you remember the context of that story of the lost sheep? How many groups of people did we have Jesus teaching to? 2 people. Jared's got his fingers up in the back. Good job, Jared. We appreciate your help. Jesus was teaching to 2 people. One group of people, I don't know, they were at this banquet. One group of people, they were known as the Pharisees. And as we said last week, the Pharisees, they were very antagonistic to Jesus. They believed in God, but their hearts were very hard. They didn't really know God. And they were very judgmental, and they were condemning of people. And they see Jesus teaching to this other group of people, the people that the Bible says were sinners. And if you think of the word sinner, you know what that means. It's people who've missed the mark, people who've screwed up. And the people that are at this dinner party are everybody you can imagine. Prostitutes, thieves, liars, people who've stolen from other people who've abandoned their family, all this stuff. These people are present. It says even tax collectors, and tax collectors were just about the worst of the worst in society. And Jesus tells this story, and he says that there's this shepherd, and he's got 100 sheep, he's very wealthy, and he loses one of the sheep, and the sheep, he wanders off. And he says, the shepherd went out and retrieved the sheep. He went out and sought after the sheep, going through peril and danger to find the sheep and bring him back home. And he says he sought after the sheep until he found him, which shows a relentless pursuit. And he says when the shepherd found the sheep, he brought him back home and rejoiced. And what he said was, those lost sheep are just like the lost people in this room. Just like the people who've made mistake after mistake, and God brings them back home to him and rejoices. So this is the message of the lost sheep. The problem is only one of the groups of people in that room understood what it meant. The sinners understood, because what Jesus was saying is that God loves them. He wants those sinners to return back to God. The Pharisees, the people who were self-righteous and cruel and judgmental and condemning, they didn't quite understand that they were lost. And so what Jesus does is he tells another story. And this is where we're at today with the parable of the prodigal son. So Jesus begins this story talking to these two groups. And Jesus says there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to the father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. And again, this is a fictional story that Jesus is telling. It's called a parable. A parable is a story that Jesus uses to teach principles about God, the character and nature of God. And in the story, you have two sons. Two brothers, one older and one younger. Now the youngest son, he wanted his inheritance. He was restless and he was sick of being bound to his father's rules. And we've all been there, right? No one here likes boundaries. Anybody here hate boundaries? Everyone's like, yes, I hate boundaries. Everyone hates boundaries. Okay, we get it. Okay. Everyone hates boundaries, so we can understand what the son is going through. We can also understand that as a parent, sometimes you just gotta let your kids do the thing they wanna do, right? Like sometimes you gotta say, okay, you can drive to the game. Every time I drive with you, I feel like you're gonna kill someone, but I guess okay, we gotta just let you go, you know? That happens as a parent with your young people. So the father agrees to give the son the inheritance, and the son, he makes his plans. He's gonna take off. It says in verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth on wild living. So the son gathers all he has. He gathers all his resources, and he cashes them out. So the father wouldn't have given him money as an inheritance. He would have given him livestock and crops and land. And so the son sells all of that. He gathers all of his resources, and he gets as far away home as he can. How many here in this moment, after church, will go on vacation if you could? Would you go on vacation if you could? Everybody here loves vacation. Even if you just got back from vacation, you want to take another vacation. Sometimes vacation from your vacation. We love vacation. Sometimes you just got to get away. And that's what this young man is doing. He's escaping, moving to a place far away from his overbearing father and his overbearing brother, a place without rules, a place without boundaries, a place where he can begin a new story. And sometimes we feel like that's what we need. We need a new start, a fresh start. And I bet he has all sorts of dreams about the things he's gonna do. What he's gonna do, he's gonna walk on to Texas Tech and eventually be the #1 overall pick and lead the Cleveland Browns to a Super Bowl. He's gonna start his own podcast called Serial, but will it be about the stuff you eat for breakfast? He's gonna be a professional rap battler and write diss tracks about his brother and father. He's going to be a preacher and make obscure pop culture references that only 20% of the congregation can understand. This man got dreams and hopes. He's going places. But he spends all of his money, You ever spend all your money? It doesn't feel good. He spends all of his money in about 4 minutes. What's he spend it on? What's this? Wait. Wild living. And that means anything you think it does. Living la vida loco. That's what he's doing. The text says in verse 30 that it's prostitution, it's partying, it's all sort of stuff that he wouldn't be very proud of. And he's doing a lot of it. So he spends all of his money very quickly. And so the son goes from having everything to having nothing in a very short period of time. And maybe you've never read this story before, but you've seen this story play out in someone you know. Everyone knows that guy from high school, that girl from high school. You've had a family member, maybe you know from personal experience, when you get to this point, when you've used up all your resources, you're far away from home, it's about to get worse. Why? Because you're desperate, right? Desperate times call for desperate measures. When people are in desperation, they do things they're not proud of. They can hurt people. It gets real bad real quick. And verse 14 says, after he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country. Of course there was. And he began to be in need. And so all of a sudden, being in a foreign country doesn't sound so great. All of a sudden, being away from home doesn't sound so great. Have you ever been like close to home, but out of gas? Like in your car, like okay, the E-light's on. And everyone here knows how many miles you can go with the E-light on. I've actually figured out how many miles I can go when my mileage meter says 0. It's about to Chardon, basically, from my house. Living La Vida Loco. It's about to Chardon, okay? So everyone has this understanding of how far you can go when you have no gas. But when you live like that, sometimes you run out of gas, right? Anybody here ever run out of gas? Right? And when you run out of gas, what do? You call somebody, right? You call somebody. I got about 10 people I can call. Like, oh, man, buddy, honey, friend. Here's the thing. I ran out of gas. Also, don't have my debit card. So can you go buy me gas and bring it to me? Definitely been here. True story. True story. This is the way my life works. Okay. One of my favorite experiences with Andrea. She was coming home from the mall one time, and she ran out of gas. Thankfully, I was right behind her, and I took the opportunity to get the gas for her, drive in front of her, and take this amazing selfie like this in the gas can. And traffic was coming, and you could see her in the other car like this. Great. I'm gonna share that out on Facebook as soon as we get out of church. But this kid can't make any calls. His Apple Pay's not working. He's got no one to pick him up. His family's far away. That's what he wanted. He wanted to be away from the people that loved him. But now maybe he's getting an idea that the path he's taken isn't really such a great idea. There's no time for regret. There's a famine. He's hungry. He's got to eat. And I think as Jesus is telling this story, we can't forget that Jesus is telling this story to a group of people. All the sinners are like, yeah, I know what desperation looks like. And all the Pharisees, they're thinking, yeah, see what you get? When you break the rules, that's what you get. And Jesus continues. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of the country who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. Said he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. He hires himself to a foreigner to work with pigs. Has anybody here ever worked on a farm? Yeah. Is it hard work? Yeah, it's hard. And there's certain things about the farm you got to get used to, right? Like you drive through the country, kind of, it smells a little bit, right? You got to get used to that. You can't be wearing white shoes. Like you gotta be ready for that. Caring for animals is dirty. It's messy, it's a hard job, especially working with pigs. I wanted to know what this looked like, so I watched a video on YouTube by cleaning a pig pen. It was gross. There was a backhoe filled with straw that had clumps of poo on top of it. I am not built for that. Not even close. And some of you are, and look, farming is the backbone of America. God bless you. If that's your upbringing, if that's what you're used to, God bless you and thank you. But that's not for me. But you can invite me to your farm and you can teach me. And I'll take some videos. How about that? So this kid is so desperate and hungry, he hires himself out to take care of the pigs. And he gets so hungry that he longs to eat the pigs' food. Have you ever had a longing for something? Like a craving, like you gotta have it? You know what I'm talking about? And sometimes it's food. Everyone's got that favorite thing. Like when it was my birthday, I'm like, what do I want? I'm about to break my diet for a week and a half because my birthday is gonna last that long. I'm 38 for God's sakes. I'm gonna celebrate with some calories and carbohydrates. So I had a longing for certain things I wanted to eat. The interesting thing in the scripture though is that word longing in Greek is also translated as lusting. This kid was so hungry, he was longing or lusting after pig's food in this dirty, nasty pig pen with all these filthy animals. He was lusting after the food of the pigs. You know, in this moment, he had to be looking back on his former life, looking back with regret, with remorse, and saying, maybe it wasn't so bad with my dad. Maybe it wasn't as oppressive as I thought. Now the text says he came to his senses. In verse 17 it says when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? My father's servants, the lowest people in his household, have food, so much food they can spare food, and I'm starving to death. And so as he stands in the middle of this pig pen, lusting after pig's food, it occurs to him that his father's servants are eating so well, and maybe he should go back home. If I could just have their table scraps, if I could just have a portion of what his servants have, at least I wouldn't be hungry like this. At least I wouldn't be lusting after the food of pigs. It says in verse 18, the son said, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. He's decided he's going to go back to his father in humility. So he got up and he went to his father. He's going to go back. And you know, he's going to prepare a speech, right? Sometimes big moments, you got to prepare what you're going to say. And so he writes down this speech. He says all the things he's going to say to his dad, and he rolls it up, and he puts it in his pocket. And he's owning up to his shortcomings, and this is a key part of the story because the son says, I know I've done wrong. He's owning up to what he's done. He's acknowledging what he's done. He understands he surrendered his birthright. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. So he's hoping at best that his father will take him back as a servant. So he leaves his job behind. He swallows his pride. That's hard to do, right? Ever had to do that? Swallow your pride? Hard stuff. Hard stuff. He puts one foot in front of the other, and he starts to head back home. Now, on the surface, this guy has made mistakes in judgment, right? He's just acting like a fool. Dumb decision after dumb decision. Again, many of us, all of us can relate to that. So he goes back to his father's house with remorse. But there's more than that. And when we read this story, we might not pick up on it, but he's going back as someone who's betrayed his family and his community. You see, the returning son has violated a sacred trust, and we see evidence of this in 4 spots. In verse 12, he asks for his inheritance early. Now that may not seem like a big deal to you, but think about it. When do you get an inheritance? When someone dies. So if I say I want my inheritance early, what are you saying to your father? I wish you were dead. Dad, you just won't die fast enough, and I can't wait for my loot. I want it now. It says in verse 13, he sells everything and leaves his home. Not only is he talking about, or not only is he taking his father's possessions and treating them like a commodity that he can profit from. Remember, he had to cash all that stuff in. Cash in his land, his livestock, his crops. He's asking to be removed from his ancestral community. And this is an offense against his father, but also against his ancestry and culture. Now, some of us come from a very proud heritage. Look, I'm just white. I got 37 different nationalities in me probably, okay? But some of you come from a very proud national or ethnic or cultural heritage. And what if you said to your family, Dad, I don't want to be Honduran anymore. Dad, I don't want to be Japanese anymore. Dad, I don't want to be Dominican anymore or Puerto Rican anymore. What would he think? What would your family think? They'd be confused. They wouldn't understand why you're saying that. They'd be upset. But by leaving, that's what he did. And so there's this, it's tremendously embarrassing to his father and his entire family. So he demands his inheritance early. He leaves his people. And as we read in verse 13, he spends his money on wild living, which we know from verse 30 is prostitutes and partying. And for his father, this would have been shameful and unacceptable because his father probably had a wife in mind. Now, this is not cool in our society for 1,000 different reasons, but they would arrange marriages back then. And when they'd arrange a marriage, it was generally between one family in this community and another neighboring family. And if my son married your daughter, you know what that meant between our families? There was peace. There was unity for generations. And so by the son leaving the father, not only did he violate his father's trust, but it could have caused a war. And finally in verse 15, there's another violation. He takes a job that breaks the religious restrictions of the faith community because this young man is Jewish and Jews are not even to touch or to be around pigs because it makes them unclean. It violates a holiness covenant. It's against their most deep-seated religious convictions. So this man has broken faith, he's broken trust, and he's broken the laws of his people. So as he returns back to his father, he's returning back as a fool, but more than a fool. He's returning as a fool who's broken every agreement and covenant and understanding held by his people. A fool who was more broken and sinful than he could have ever imagined. Now remember, Jesus is telling this story to two groups of people, and as he's telling this story, he's talking to sinners, he's talking to Pharisees, and one of these groups of people, the sinners, would have understood they were just like the son in the story. They'd made mistake after mistake. They've broken every relationship. They've caused hurt in every relationship in their own lives. They've caused hurt in the lives of the people that they love. And they felt there was no turning back because that's what the Pharisee said. That's what the religious understanding of the day was. Once you've gone too far, you can't come back. But as they're listening to this story, they're listening and they're saying, I'm that son. I'm that son. Jesus just talked about the sheep and I was that sheep and he brought me home. What's going to happen to the son? Because I'm the son. Now the other group, the group that was self-righteous, the Pharisees, the religious hypocrites, they're listening too, but they're shaking their head and they're thinking, the son has no business going back home. He will be lucky to sleep outside. And yeah, if he got the scraps from the table of the servants, that'd be generous because he doesn't deserve any of that. He's more broken and more sinful than he could ever imagine. So as Jesus is telling this story, as these two groups of people with their own set of expectations, with their own agenda, their own shame, their own beliefs, waiting to hear the outcome of the story, hanging on every word. And Jesus continues. While the son was still a long way off, the son is walking towards home. He's getting closer. He sees those landmarks, the ones that you see when you know you're coming back home, when you're getting off on the exit. He sees his father's cattle. He sees the outline of his father's house. But he's got that nervous pressure. You ever gotta go somewhere, but you don't really want to go there, right? Maybe it's work. You got written up. You got to talk to your boss. They don't want you on Facebook while you're working. I know it's terrible. But you got to talk to your boss. You got to have that tough conversation with a friend. You've got to work up that nerve to apologize. You're about to ask her out. You know what I'm talking about, that pressure, that weight. This is how the son feels. Palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. He's nervous, but on the surface, he looks calm and ready. That's how the son feels. He's hopeful, but aware that the father could reject him. Aware that the father could push him away. But as he was still a long way off, the father saw him. The father saw his son coming. And you wonder, as the son was anxiously looking back at his home, did he see the father looking back at him? And the son says, what will he say? He's nervous. Will he reject me? Will he turn me away? Will he scold me? Will he humiliate me? His heart is beating. He's nervous. And as Jesus is telling this story, all the sinners are hanging on every word, and the Pharisees are setting their jaw in self-righteousness. The Pharisees are saying, he's about to get what he deserves. The sinners are saying, I hope he takes him back because I'm the son. Each of them waiting on the father's reaction. His father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. His father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. It was almost as if he was waiting for his son to return. It was almost as if he was looking at that horizon every day, waiting and watching and hoping that his son would come home. And he saw his tattered clothing. He saw his emaciated figure. He saw his weary, tired steps. And he ran to his son. You see, the father didn't wait for someone else in the community to get to him first. He ran. And when he found him, he didn't respond to him in coldness or indifference. He didn't interview him. And he said, son, I want you to tell me everything you've done wrong. I want to keep account of all the things you've done. He loved his son with all his imperfections. My son was more lost and hopeless and broken than he could have ever imagined. Yet at the same time, more loved and accepted than he ever dared dream. So he ran. He ran to him and he threw his arms around him and then he kissed him. The returning fool, the returning lawbreaker, the returning failure was greeted with love. There's no mistake about the father's intentions. There's no hesitation. He didn't have to call his friends. He didn't have to pray about it first. He didn't have to think it over. He didn't have to talk to the servants or his other son. He ran to his son. Now, how do you think that lost son felt? Can you imagine the relief? Now the son, he gets out his paper. He unfolds it. His dad's running to him. The son, he's crying. He knows his dad's about to come. And when his dad comes, he gets his paper out. He says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Now notice the son understands that he sinned against his father. There's an awareness, there's an acknowledgement. And he's trying to repent and he's trying to come clean. But the father said to the servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And the son's trying to read the speech, and the father, he gets it. He knows he's sorry, so he takes the speech and he says, "Come here, son." And the father, he calls to his servants and he says, "Bring the best robe. Get these rags off my son. Replace them with the finest of what we have. Put my ring on his dirty hands." Now the robe tells the community, my son has been restored. The ring says he shares all my wealth and all my power. And the sandals say, he's not going anywhere. My son is home. Now notice that he orders the servants to bring these gifts while he's still on the road, because he wants the neighbors to see. Because again, the sin against the father was a sin against the entire community. Everyone knew what was happening, and everyone was talking about that son. He wants the neighbors to see his bold love. He wanted his neighbors to see his audacity in love on display to his friends and neighbors. He wanted them all to see. He wants his son to know in public, in front of all the world, that he loves him and that he was rejoicing in his return. Rejoicing. Verse 23, it says, the father says, "Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So let's begin to celebrate." The father celebrates the return of his son with the entire community. He showed all of them out on the road that he loves his son. He's bringing them back. They're going to have a party so everyone can enjoy it and everyone can see the forgiveness and love of the father. Together they'd celebrate the lost being found and the dead coming back to life. And if you're in that crowd that day, if you're one of those sinners, if you're one of those lost sons, you know so clearly that he's talking to you, that you are the returning son, and that Jesus is the embracing father. Jesus is the one who runs out to the sinner. Jesus is the one that restores his dignity. You were lost and broken and hurt and rejected, more lost and hopeless and sinful than you could ever imagine, but more loved and accepted in Jesus than you could ever dare dream. The love of Jesus restores the sinner back to dignity. This is what the gospel does. It restores hope. It renews dignity. It creates in us a new reality. It creates in us, it makes us a new creation. But remember, the father had two sons. And if that lost son represented all the sinners in the crowd that day, the second son, he represented the Pharisees, the religious leaders that were so quick to condemn the sinner. And as all this is going on in this story, the lost son being brought back home, and he's getting his bling back. He's getting to eat some meat. He's having a good time. He's elevated to the highest standing. Well, all this time, the older son is working in the field. And it says, when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked, "What's going on?" And the servant says, "Your brother has come." And he replied, "Your brother has come and he filled the fattened calf because he's back home safe and sound." And you see in this story, you see in the brother's reaction, multiple layers of shock and surprise. My brother has come back? Why are we accepting him back? So it's okay for him just to show up again. Okay. And we're going to kill the prize calf and we're going to have a party over that guy? Why are we inviting the community here for this person who didn't want anything to do with us? It says the older brother became angry and refused to go in. He was so mad he couldn't face his brother. He's so mad he didn't want to have to face all those people celebrating and being happy. So angry, so hurt, he wanted nothing to do with what was happening in there. His father comes out. he begs him. With all his passion and sincerity, son, come back inside and celebrate with us because your brother, my son, is home. He's alive. Son, I've been waiting for him. I've been standing out there. You've seen me every night, every morning waiting for him, and he's come back. And you see this tension between grace and forgiveness and that constant desire to achieve righteousness on the other hand. And righteousness is good. Holiness is good. But the son, he's got a point. He's saying, look, that kid has been terrible. He's broken all the rules. He doesn't deserve to be here, Dad. But he's back, son. But Daddy doesn't deserve it. But son, he's back. And the son, older son, he states his case. He says, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeying your orders, yet you never gave me even a goat so I can celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours has squandered your property with prostitutes, he's come home, you've killed the fattened calf for him, you're throwing a party for him. Dad, I've worked hard for you. I've worked in your fields every single day. I've listened to you. Dad, I followed your advice. I've been respectful and obedient. Dad, I followed the laws of your house, the laws of the community, the laws of God, and you never gave me a party. You didn't even give me the lowest animal on the food chain. But this son of yours, who I don't even want to call my brother, the son of yours who's turned his back on us and squandered everything he had, everything you had, you're celebrating him. That is not fair. It's not fair, Dad. My son, the father said, you were always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours, he was dead. And he's alive again. He was lost, but now he's found. And this father responds to his son in tenderness, and he says, son, you had everything that was already mine. We shared it. And your righteousness is to your credit, but your brother was lost. He was dying, and he knows he messed up, and he's back. So we're going to celebrate because he was more hopeless and lost and sinful than he can ever have imagined, yet at the same time, more loved and accepted than he could ever dreamed. That son who left me, that son who left you, that broke my heart, broke my trust, but it broke his heart too. It broke his heart too, and now he's back. He's back for a new start. He's back for a new story. And I think as Jesus concluded this story, there was this fresh wave of joy in the people who'd been known as lost sons. They heard it one time in the parable of the lost sheep, and they felt it then. But now there's more confirmation that the Father loves them. And he's telling them, even as they are being criticized and condemned by the religious leaders, that God desires to restore them and renew them. And I know for a fact that we are in a community where this is a deep-seated need and desire. And I'm not talking about outside these, I'm not talking about them, us, people in this building, people outside this building. I'm talking about all of us human beings, all of us here, all of us out there, anybody living and breathing. We are all broken in our own way. Every single one of us. And even when we're trying to seek Jesus with all of our hearts, we are constantly missing the mark. We are constantly failing and falling and stumbling. And I'm not just talking about the people with the long list of screw-ups. I'm talking about people like all of us. You know what? The truth is, that is us. The people with the long list of screw-ups, right? I know I can identify. But I'm also talking about the people who are so easily moved to judgment. And I think all of us have that part of us too, don't we? I think this attitude of judgment and condemnation can so easily work into our hearts. It's easy to do, especially if we have messed up, because when we get it figured out, we think we got it figured out. When we get it figured out, we think we're done working, or this spot in our lives has been healed and fixed. And so when you've overcome something, maybe you get to this spot, you sort of turn your nose up, and you start to say to people, you know what, you deserve what you get. Because maybe you can't understand how people can make poor financial choices. You have no understanding how someone could cheat on their wife, or how people could squander away their money on gambling or alcohol or drugs. You have no way to identify with the person who sells their body for money. You have no way to identify with the person who hits their spouse. You have no way to identify, and maybe you don't care to identify with the sex offender. You don't want to identify, you don't care to identify with the mother who hurts her children, or the addict who steals from their parents. But understand that those are the very people sitting at the feet of Jesus in this story. It's all the people who we turn our nose to and say, no, too far gone. All the people who we'd say, God doesn't want them. God can't. How could he forgive them? That's who he's eating with. That's who he's telling this story to. And in our condemnation, and in the position that we take in our heart that says there's no way that God can forgive them, there's no way that God can look past that, we become lost sons and daughters too. Equally broken, equally in need of Jesus' love. Because the condemnation is no better than the sin. All equally in need of grace and love and mercy. There's this turning point in this story back in that pig pen when he was lusting after the food of pigs. He understood his own mistakes. He understood he had to go back home. He felt sorry. He knew he messed up. He knew he had to go back in humility, and he stepped out in faith, trusting that the Father would love him well. Now, what if all of us, and I'm talking to all of you here, I don't know where you're from, I don't know where you live, I don't know what neighborhood you're from, I don't know your family history, I don't know what you've been through today, I don't know what you came in here carrying, but what if all of us made a decision right now as lost sons and daughters to return home? What if those of us who are broken into 1,000 pieces, those of us who are so ugly in so many ways, said, I'm gonna go back to the Father. I'm walking back right into the arms of Jesus because I'm more hopeless and broken and sinful than I could have ever imagined, but in the arms of Jesus, more loved and accepted and forgiven than I could ever dare dream. And what if all of us who are so quick to condemn, what if those of us who have a certain kind of people we just can't tolerate, those of us have such a hard time forgiving, what if we agreed to acknowledge our brokenness too? And what if we agreed to walk alongside of the outcast? What if we agreed to walk alongside of the rejected, knowing that we are the same, walking back home with them? And see, what if all of us agreed in our desperate need of healing and restoration and sought Jesus to make us whole? I know what would happen. Change. Real, transformative change. I'm not talking about the kind of change where your day gets better. I'm talking about everything around you changing, because the gospel is not just a concept. The gospel is not just about being saved. It is that. It's all of that. But it's a power designed in heaven and given to us, and it changes everything. The gospel changes everything around us. It changes the ugliness we see in our own lives. It sees the cruelty we see in our communities. It sees the disunity and despair that we see all around us in our families and our own relationships. The gospel says that all of us are together equally wrecked, but equally loved, equally lost, yet equally pursued. I want to ask that you guys stand with me.